Welcome to the Data Playbook podcast. It's a podcast for data leaders to learn how to build data-centric organizations. We do that through a series of interviews with other data leaders, data experts, and data practitioners. The topic of today is building high-performance data teams. And to talk about that topic, I have with me Rushil. Rushil, welcome to the Data Playbook podcast.
Thank you.
Can you maybe quickly introduce yourself for the audience? Who are you?
Yeah, so I'm right now I'm a data engineer, by title. But a bit of like my history is I started off in really as a software engineer, right?
Okay.
So that was my kind of entry point into this world, and then after this, I decided to go into data science. Yeah. And I pursued this. I worked a bit in this industry. I also furthered my studies in this direction. But there was something for me that wasn't quite fitting me. Data science, and this was a bit before the times of LLMs, before they really took off. So yeah, maybe my opinion would be different now, but at that time it wasn't really fitting for me. And that's when I kind of moved into data engineering.
Okay.
And I've been working in data engineering or as a data engineer for around 5 years now, both in terms of building pipelines, also working a bit on the platform side, and also leading data teams.
Yeah.
So I've had a fair number of different experiences in data.
Yeah. And I think you're very humble. I said that a few times to you, but one of the reasons why we invited you over to the podcast is you've led successful data projects for us at Dataminded. Both clients and engineers working in your team were very happy with how you led those teams. So I think you're a very good candidate to discuss about, what makes a team high performance, right? What makes a team successful? I think while we were prepping this podcast, there are certain dimensions, right? And maybe let's just dive right into them and go with the first dimension. And the first thing you told me is, before thinking about high performance teams or technology or processes, the first thing is the link to business. You need to know why you're building something. What do you mean by that?
But I think there's just everything within the data space. There's a lot of hype with it, right? And I think in many cases, many companies, you say, okay, we want to do something with data, or we think there's value in our data, but there's no real questions that they want to answer at that point. They say, okay, we just get it now and we answer the questions later. But I don't think that this mindset can really work, because you need something to drive what you're doing. You know, you need to be answering some question, and then you figure the rest of the things out aligned with that question that you're trying to answer. Because there's so many variables, there's so many things you could do, there's so many technologies you could use, ways you can organize things. It's like an endless possibilities.
Yeah.
And you need some question to anchor you down, and then that you can work towards. Otherwise, I think you can spend a lot of time, a lot of money, just going down a million avenues, and just creating not a mess, but creating a lot of complexity, where what you actually want doesn't need all of that complexity. Yeah,
without a clear goal in mind, right?
Exactly.
Does that also mean for you that ideally, when you build data teams, that there is very strong involvement from business people? And do you consider those business people to be in the data team, or do you want them very close to the data team? How do you like to work best with business? What setup works for you?
Well, I think that to say in the team, that's maybe theoretically the best, but I cannot imagine that they would be, say, full-time in your team.
Yeah, they don't have the time for that, right? Yeah.
And also, if they are full-time in your team, then maybe they are no longer touching enough the business side of things. So I think it's mostly very closely aligned, right? That it's not that you need them 100% in your team, but they need to always be available to you if you have questions, if you need feedback, and the other way around as well.
Okay.
So mostly it's about this, like the communication. If they will answer you, if they will make the time to talk to you, and vice versa, whenever needed, I think that's good enough. So very closely aligned.
Yeah. Typically, when companies start on their journey, where you're completely right, by the way, very often companies say, we want to do something with data, and the latest version of that is we want to do something with AI. Everybody wants to do something with ChatGPT these days, right? Everybody's doing it. Our company should do it. And so you're saying it needs to be clear what kind of value they want to get out of it. And do you know, how you can find that value on the business side? Are you ever involved in projects where you help make a business case for a data project, or do you typically start from the business cases there already? We can start building. Is my question clear?
Not fully clear now.
So imagine if a client says to you, we want to do more with data, and we believe in the power of AI, but we don't have a very good case. How do you translate that to a case?
Well, if they're already coming to you and saying we want to do something, but we don't know what, I think that within some industries it would be easier than others, right? So if you're talking about more, let's say, generic industries like retail, or transportation or something, then I think you can just look outside what are other companies in this space doing with data, and see, maybe build a POC around that to see if they have available the data that you need. Can you do some kind of proof of concept to show them, okay, this company is doing this with data. Let's see if we can find some value in it for you as well. I think in these more generalized industries, it's easier. When you start talking about really specialized companies, right, where maybe they're the only one in the world or the only one in the region doing something, then it becomes harder to find these things. That being said, usually, even if their core business is not generic, there will be parts that are, right, probably how they handle their accounts, how they do HR, all of these things might be a better avenue than to look for like a first use case.
Okay, and once you've selected a use case, in your experience, it always takes time to set up a first use case, right? You need to set up infrastructure, you need to do many things for the first time. What is for you the ideal time to value? Is it you want to ship something valuable the first week? Is it the first month? Might it take 3 months, 6 months? What is for you an ideal setup there?
Well, I think a few months is good, but I don't think it's easy to give a definitive amount of time, right? Because the first question probably would be, okay, as a someone coming in to look for this value, depending on the organization, the amount of time just to get set up, get a bit familiar, get access to data, get familiar with the setup, look a bit into the quality of the data that they have, that already, it could be very quick, it could take longer depending on the company. But assuming that now you have that in place, then I think if it's really about this proof of concept phase, then a few months, maybe let's say 2 to 3 months, provided it's not that you get locked in a room for this time and then you come out at the end of that period and say, okay, I've built something. I think during that time, it should still be as much as possible interacting with your stakeholders, Yeah. And maybe you can show value sooner, or maybe you decide to change direction. But as long as I think there's good communication the whole way through, it's not the exact deadline is not that important.
Yeah, because you can iterate quickly together with your stakeholder, and you're looking for value together, right?
Yeah.
Okay. The second dimension you mentioned about building high performance data teams is of course the skills of the people themselves, right? And although there is plenty of books and tutorials and videos and things that go around to upskill yourself, the skill of the individual engineers and the scientists do play a critical role in making the team successful, right? And I wonder how you look at dealing with that, and what do you typically focus on when upskilling team members?
Yeah, well, the first thing you say is really important as well, right? That the technology, the tools, the resources are really available all over.
Yeah.
I think this is it's not an industry where there's like a shortage of knowledge,
yeah.
Right? And probably the problem is not so much that there's not the knowledge, but in a way there's so much out there. There's so many opinions. It seems that it's difficult for people to focus in on something. So, okay, how do I actually learn? I know that I have all these resources available to me, but what they're looking for is some direction.
Okay.
What should I learn now, or what is what is no longer relevant, right? Because it's hard to know if you just not necessarily starting out, but if you more junior, to know what to learn.
Yeah.
And I think there it really comes from being able to look to someone more senior, so to look to a person in your team that you can trust to say, okay, go in this direction. But obviously this is still opinionated. It's not, there's no kind of objective best path, I think, to learn them. So it is going to be strongly guided by the person who's providing the training, right?
So for you, it's more important to have senior people in the team that can guide juniors than it is to have a bunch of tutorials or video walkthroughs available on a specific technology.
Yeah, I think so, because having these technologies, having these resources available, that's there, right? It doesn't, I'm not going to add much more value by recording also my own kind of how-to guide on something, right? But I think that the job of the more senior person is a bit to sift through what's out there, and to give a bit of guidance to someone, right? To say, okay, there's 100 things, but don't worry about those 100 things for now. Just focus on these 2 or 3. But yeah, of course, implicit in that is there's some bias. It will be what that senior person values, right? And it's not. They could be wrong as well. But I think it's better than trying to learn everything.
But I think in a way we come to a different topic, which is actually as much key as upskilling your junior engineers, is you need to have a few very good senior engineers that can lead the way, right? Yeah. Okay, and then because I agree, like if you upskill your juniors by having a few seniors, they will be influenced by how the senior engineers think, and there's no right or wrong. Yeah. Then at the same time, that's true for every kind of, if you follow a course on Data Camp, or if you go to a course of the Dataminded Academy, or whatever, you go to Coursera for a course, you're also getting an opinionated view. There's no mathematical truth to any of this, right? But then if you say, okay, so there's a lot of upskilling needs to happen within the team, what are some best practices that you've seen work, and what do you like to upskill more junior engineers?
So I think that having some because you want to transfer knowledge, right, as efficiently as possible to the junior people. So something quite effective I found is kind of a short list of coding best practices.
Okay.
Right. So this is something that people with a strong opinion about this, let's say some more senior people in the team, they can take a few days, a few hours or a few days to come up with some best practices.
Can you give an example? What is the best practice?
using pre-commit hooks. And then
what is it? So for the less technical audience, what is a pre-commit hook?
Where it's in your coding flow.
Yeah.
That it's a way of automating some checks while you're doing your development, right? So you can. There's two parts to that, right? One is to say it's a lot of overhead to remember to manually do these checks yourself. So as a good practice, just automate that. It's something that can be done simply, and then you make sure that every time you're pushing some code, you run checks.
And those checks could be like a linter or what kind of checks?
Yeah, exactly. So then that's the second part of it. Okay, well, what checks do you run? And then that's another thing which is good to have a template for. Yeah. So what we've done at a previous client is indeed we have a coding guidelines.
Yeah.
For example, use pre-commit hooks, and then taking a bit the step further to also have some things templated out. So with our pre-commit hooks again, we then made a template of, okay, these are the 10 that we think are valuable that everyone should run, and we make a template for that and allow everyone else in the team to make use of it. Of course, this is also something that it shouldn't be taken as a dogma then by the team, right? They should also understand why are we doing the checks we are doing, and as time goes on, people should also be comfortable to add more if they feel things are missing or question why we do certain things. But I think it makes sense to start at least from clear guidelines and make templates where possible that people can reuse.
Okay. What is your view on pair programming?
I think it's valuable, but it's not always appropriate for every case, because it's valuable, but then there's a big dimension of pair programming is the people who are involved in that, right? Some people really are more introverted than others. Maybe they don't. They want to have that experience. So I think it's the first challenge is are the people involved in the pair programming, are they both comfortable? Because if they are not comfortable, then I think you won't get the value you would like from it. And another dimension on that is if you are doing pair programming, typically you would have a configuration. It can change, of course, but one person more senior being more of a guide and another person more junior.
Yeah.
But what you have to be careful of there is that it can easily start to feel like the more junior person is being judged or being not attacked, but scrutinized in that moment. And that's something you want to avoid. It really needs to just be an environment of let's learn. If you have questions, no matter how stupid they are, just feel comfortable to ask them. And I think it's the job of the person doing the guidance or the mentoring in that case to not to make sure they get that across, right? To make sure that they are not approaching this as an opportunity to laugh at someone who doesn't know what they know.
Yeah. That is super important. Like you need to put your ego aside, right? But by the way, I think pair programming is not just a senior and a junior. In this case, it could be because you want to mentor, but it can also just be two random engineers paired together and learning from each other, right? Also, a senior can learn from a junior, right?
Of course.
But I think you touched on another point, which is indeed true. It's a mistake we made in the past, is that we were responsible as a team for both coaching them, guiding them, but also evaluating them, right? And can you elaborate a bit on that, on what went wrong there?
Well, so specifically, if we would take this, so we have if you have these two objectives, guide people, coach them, and evaluate them.
Yeah.
I think it really makes people become closed off,
Yeah.
right? Because if you know you're being evaluated, you're going to always try to show your best self, so to speak, right? But if you need to be if you need to be guided, if you need to be coached, you want to see a person's weaknesses.
Yeah.
You want to see, okay, how can we help them improve? So if you are trying to look for ways that they can improve, but in their mind it's, I need to make sure that this person sees the best version of myself, there's immediately a clash between these two things, right? And I think specifically if you go into the pair programming example, it creates a very weird dynamic, because the person then will only show you what maybe they're already competent in.
Yeah.
And then you don't see actually the places where you can add value. So it becomes a bit of a wasted exercise at that point. A wasted exercise that I think brings a lot of stress and a lot of strain to the person, the person being evaluated.
Indeed, yeah. So I think in those cases it's important to make a clear distinction between, are we evaluating a team or are we coaching and guiding a team? We cannot do both, right?
Yeah, I think you cannot do both. I think that we are also engineers, right? As most people in the industry don't have a very strong background in teaching and how to interact with people. So maybe there are cases where someone is really gifted in being able to manage both. But I think that in general, people who are more technical don't have this strong background of teaching or coaching that they can effectively manage both.
Okay. Maybe switching to another dimension of building high performance teams is managing stakeholders. What kind of stakeholders do you typically have in a data team, and how do you deal with them?
So within your data team, you have, stakeholders, there's for me, it's also not just about the outside, right?
Okay.
It's inside. Stakeholders is everyone who's a bit involved in what's going on. So it's the developers, it's the architects, the product owner. This is the let's say the internal stakeholders. And then as you start going beyond this, you have different levels of management. And then your sort of the business party that you are trying to build a solution for.
Yeah.
Right. So I think these are the different groups. When you're talking about people a bit outside of your direct team, right? So now we're talking about the business people, higher levels of management. Of course, you cannot go to the CEO of a company and message him every 5 minutes about, what's going on with the project. This doesn't really make sense. But I think it's about the right, there will be certain people closer to the project than others. And these that are a bit at the boundary of your circle, the most important thing for me is communication, right? Let's rather over communicate with these people, try to involve them as much as possible. Don't lock yourself, again, I said it earlier, but don't lock yourself in a room for a few months and then think you're going to come out with an answer, because this iterating with your direct stakeholders, the ones just outside of your circle, it's super important. And maybe you have a fear that they're going to come with some negative feedback, but rather sooner than later,
Yeah.
Or get that feedback within a day, and it's okay. Maybe it's not nice to hear, but you can then move on from that. But
if you come on time, right? But indeed, if you wait 5 months and then the feedback is negative, then things are loaded, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, but because we sometimes, as engineers, as people in the technical space, I think also the fact that we talk about stakeholder management, for me, it's a bit funny that it's just about communication as people, we come up with these terms of, okay, how are we going to manage the people around the project and so on. But sometimes it's just talk to them. And maybe for some people it's harder than others because it doesn't come so naturally. But I think that's kind of what it boils down to, right? That no matter what you do, whether you're playing sport, you're doing data, you are just working in a kitchen, whatever it is, it's just communicate with the other people who are there in a kind of without waffling, just clear communication, and try to adapt a bit with the person you are communicating with. So there's different personality types. So maybe you have to adapt a bit to your style of communication, but I don't think it's anything specific about data here. It's just human communication.
But I guess it's easier for some people who are more outgoing. Well, outgoing personalities is not a word, but who have not a lot of issues communicating with people. I think the hard part there is that plenty of engineers are engineers for a reason, because they know they can better talk to a computer than talk to a human, right? And so sometimes it's a struggle for them to just.
Yes, I know, but at the same time we talk a lot about, okay, invest in your skills, learn things, and maybe consider, if you are an engineer, maybe you have to consider as well, okay, I can spend 2 months learning Rust, or I can, or maybe my time would be better to spend, to challenge myself a bit in this aspect.
Yeah.
Because you would go into engineering probably if you are a bit naturally more introverted, but I think there is also a bit of ownership you need to take to make sure that you can deliver your message to people. And not everyone needs to say lead a team. There will always be people more in the background, more in the foreground when it comes to communication, but even that engineer needs to, at least internally within the team, manage his or her stakeholders in a way, right? They need to talk to a product owner, they need to talk to an architect, to other engineers. And so you cannot really ever completely detach yourself from this.
And I wonder, how did you learn that? Because you're also more introvert. You're not this super outgoing, shouty person that grabs all the attention in the room, but you learned how to communicate with stakeholders. Or did it come natural for you from the beginning?
No, it definitely didn't come naturally. I think for me, I really grew a lot in this when I moved country, and I kind of was stuck in a place where I knew nobody. I couldn't rely on someone else to talk for me or to do things for me, and it was a bit adapt or die. And I think in a few months, I really went from being very introvert. Well, I still am introverted, but I can handle myself better than I could before this this move. So that's a bit why I say, like, okay, it doesn't, just because you are not naturally strong in this, you can learn it. Maybe you will never be perfect, but you can improve also in this. And for me, it was just moving abroad, moving to a place where I had no real connections to rely on.
And you mean specifically moving from South Africa to Belgium then, or which move were you to?
Yeah, this move from South Africa to Belgium.
Okay, all right, cool. Switching to another topic around building high performance teams is to have a good process, right? And I'm going to throw in the term agile because we all like to work agile, but it's the most overloaded term probably in IT and in data. So what kind of processes do you like? How do you look at agile? What kind of processes do you like to set up?
So I really like agile myself, and I know
what is agile to you?
Yeah, exactly. So for me, it's mostly about one thing, and that is being adaptive to feedback. So oftentimes, what you see is teams will say, okay, we work agile. And what this kind of means is they have some ceremonies that they do, and every 2 weeks or 3 weeks or whatever is the time scale that they sit and they plan out
the next 2 weeks.
The next 2 weeks. But typically, this is just, okay, we have a big backlog, and now we're going to take tasks from this backlog. And that part is fine because it means you can be adaptable. But the core of it for me is that you must adapt to something. And that something that you must adapt to is feedback. And this for me is about the heart of Agile is you need to make sure that you have a feedback loop in your system, that you have a way of building something, getting it to a person who is either your end user or someone who is a good surrogate for your end user, listening to what they have to say, and then taking that feedback into consideration as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
It's not about, it's because I've seen it many times where the feedback loop is completely missing.
Yeah.
And without that, I think there's no value to working in this in some sort of pseudo agile way. And more than that, so you have this kind of, I lost my train of thought.
More than that, you talked about agile.
Yeah.
You talked about not having a feedback loop. It's not adding any value without a feedback loop.
And that there's also the cases where you want to kind of, because I like this idea of working agile, right? Mm-hmm. But it's also not that you need to do this all the time, because the real reason that this process was developed to say, okay, we must be adaptive to feedback is because there are some problems where you don't know where the value is.
Yeah.
And so you need a feedback loop to help you figure out as efficiently as possible, where is the value? If your project is really clear and you know what you are building and you don't care about any feedback because you say, okay, we know the value, we have the boss wants us to do this thing. We have all the requirements cleared out. Then you don't need agile, right? You don't need to be agile. You know what your goal is. Agile is really when there's unclarity about what your goal is.
Yeah, indeed. So in a way, agile in practice is often the reverse of the kind of agile that you preach here, I think, because in practice, what I see people do is they do 2-week sprints, but then at the end of the sprint should be a feedback moment, and then based on that feedback, you plan for a new sprint, right? But very often say, we need to do this big thing, and what you say, and this thing will take us 3 months. We know it will take us 3 months, but let's cut it up in many 2-week sprints and not go to production for 3 months because we're working on it for 3 months. And then you have all the ceremonies of Agile. You need to do all the sprint planning, you need all backlog grooming, all that. But you know ahead of what you're going to do the next 3 months, right? You're going to build that big thing that we all agreed that we would build, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's like, maybe it's useful for project management purposes, that you can show a burn down chart and you can, it can be easier to not think too far ahead. So you say, okay, we have a big task, but we're going to treat it in these increments. It can be good for a project management thing, but it's not agile, no.
Yeah, exactly. I like what you said, that agile in essence is about capturing feedback, right? So as long as you're capturing feedback and iterating based on that, I think you're running an agile process. Right?
Yeah.
But I think in practice, most companies are agile only once a quarter. I don't know if you ever worked in the SAFe methodology, Scaled Agile Framework.
No. Yeah, so
that is for, it's going to be a real treat once you encounter it. That is for larger organizations. Every quarter they get together and align on the next program increment. And they agree on what to do for the next 3 months. And then once they agreed on that, then every team breaks down that program increment in, 6 different 2-week sprints or something. But it's completely useless because you're only going to realign next 3 months anyway. So then just call it a 3-month iteration. And if your iterations take 3 months, well, then you're very close to just being waterfall, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
Okay. I think next topic on your list was, let me double check that I get this right, engineering best practices. So in order to build high performance teams, you also need some best practices, some engineering best practices. What are they to you, and how do you introduce them?
I would say that the core to all of this is testing. I think for me, this is a extremely important best practice that make sure you have some form of testing. Okay. But also not just have tests for the sake of having them, but you need to do some critical thinking. Okay, what are we testing? Why are we testing? But then make sure you have them implemented and automated, right? So you do see it sometimes that, okay, we say we have testing, but it's not automated testing, right? Yeah. It's having someone click through a dashboard or something similar to that. And there are cases where this is valuable, but as an engineer, you want to have these things really automated, I think, and repeatable, right?
How does it help you? I agree, to be clear. But
I think it's really about, well, giving you confidence that what you are doing, I see two things. So giving you confidence that then future changes you make don't break what is already existing. But then also by having the tests, it just becomes more understandable, both for new mostly for then the people you are collaborating with, to understand what it is that your system is doing, right? Because usually in a test, you can get a better grasp of what are the cases that I'm trying to deal with in a project, right? So it makes things clear, and then it prevents issues in the back. You can also use it in a bit of a test-driven development style where you start first with writing tests and then build the code to meet that. But I think that part's a bit a choice. If you
have you done that in the past?
For small things, yes.
Yeah.
But I think it has its place. But of course, like it's also something that can be a bit abused, right? If you say, well, I'm going to write a test and I just test for one case, that shouldn't stop you from thinking of other kind of edge cases already. It's, I think it's a useful practice to do this sort of test-driven development, but you shouldn't then just only focus on getting that test to pass. There's other things probably that you have to still do. But so to get to back a bit to your question, what do I see as the important sort of engineering best practices? So I think, yes, I would start, if you don't have the mindset of testing, unit testing, integration testing, all levels of testing, start with that. Start with the simple ones at least. So unit testing, and then run the tests. And so if you get into saying, well, run the tests, that typically means you're going to need some kind of CI/CD process, right? To but automate that as well, to make sure that you run these tests when there's not a risk, but your code is going to move to a production kind of environment. You should have CI/CD in place. And that's one, to run your tests, but two, also to make it really clear and repeatable. How do your deployments happen, right? Because if you don't have it written out in CI/CD and you just rely on people doing certain things, well, that means that it's very difficult to understand all the implications of what you are doing. So as quickly as possible, I think it's about getting these things just visible and written as code, and not relying on information in people's heads. Yeah. So I think for me, these are the two main things that are quite general.
So if I can summarize, it's automated tests and having a good automated deployment pipeline. Those two things are for you very important engineering best practices.
Yes, I think this is really where you should start.
And how do you look at, because we have encountered some clients who built a lot of the data pipelines using drag and drop tooling. And I know we moved them to a more code first approach. How do you look at those two approaches?
I think that drag and drop, well, it can have its place, right? It's not that these are, I don't like to talk in this is the right way and something else is the wrong way, right? But it's really about, you need to look, is it the right thing for me? Is it the right thing for the team or not?
Mm-hmm. And when is it the right thing?
Well, I think it's the right thing when you are, in a way, pushing some of the work closer to business.
Yeah.
And people are not having the intention of writing code, or they cannot write code. I think there's some value of it there. But if you have an engineering team, all of the tooling, all of the kind of skills in general of engineers start from code.
Yeah.
It's very difficult. The ecosystem of software engineering is set up around code.
Yeah.
And when you go for drag and drop, maybe it can start off well because, okay, you set up some kind of simple pipeline, 1 or 2 steps.
Yeah.
Great. But as time goes on, complexity increases, and then it becomes way harder to manage.
Yeah.
It becomes way harder to manage a visual, a diagram, than it does just to write things as code and rely a bit on industry best practices.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right. The other best practices that come to mind, or things that you've implemented at clients that you think that's important that we should definitely do again?
Well, the separation of, well, not separation, but I think it's really important to find good abstractions, and typically whether you're working on premises or on cloud or whatever it is, your data architecture, or in general, your software architecture is going to be made up of a lot of different technical components, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's important that you need to look a bit functionally and break this up into functional components in addition to the technical ones, and build abstractions over these functional components, that if someone is interacting with some functional system, they shouldn't need to care about all the pieces that it's made up of, right? So I think typically finding these good abstractions and then allowing that other parties can interact with them in a declarative way, right? So with a configuration file, they say what they want and that they don't have to understand all the procedures that happen in the back. So, for example, if you are configuring a scheduling of some piece of code, so if you have a platform and you want a user of the platform to interact with the scheduling aspect of your platform, you shouldn't need that they understand everything about, let's say, Airflow.
Yeah,
right?
which specific tool you use for scheduling.
Yeah. But rather that their interface to that should, for example, be a configuration file.
Yeah.
And they can just say there, I need this to run at this time. And what command at what time, and something quite simple. Also with security, you don't want that they have to go and understand all the complexity of your security model, but rather through some kind of declarative interface, say this person should be able to do this, and that's it.
Yeah, interesting. I think we covered a lot of topics already. We covered business value, team skills, processes, engineering best practices. I'm missing one, I think. Which one we also cover? Anyway, there's a final one that I also like to touch upon, and that's technology accelerators. Right, you've worked on very modern data platforms in the cloud using state-of-the-art tools. You also worked on a bit more legacy systems on-prem. how do you look at the differences between the two, and what are the benefits, and how do you deal with not being at the latest state-of-the-art solutions?
I don't have a problem. So about the last point about state-of-the-art, for me, this is not the biggest concern. To say, I think that you can, if you are solving good business questions, you don't necessarily, in a lot of cases, you don't need the latest cutting edge stack to solve certain business questions, right? So for me, that's not that important. But if I would make the distinction between working more on premises versus working in the cloud, for example, this distinction, I think it really comes down to me for people and knowledge, that to take a step back, right? Like I think the main benefit of working in the cloud versus on premises is this idea of scalability, that you can scale when you want, right? And you don't have to over provision your resources. So I think that's really an obvious benefit of being in the cloud. But more than that, as I say, for me, it's quite about knowledge, and that the current, now I mentioned state of the art, is working more on cloud technologies, right? Which also means that passionate people, skilled people tend to go in that direction. And so if you want to work on-prem, it can be extremely difficult to find the people you need to build and maintain an on-premises system. Like the ones who I would say are most interested in the field will tend to go and follow the state of the art, let's say. So I think finding people is really difficult if you want to work on-prem, and also just the collective, the hive mind when it comes to solving problems. If you are working in the cloud, you have access to just way more other people who have encountered similar problems, and because you are working with, let's say, more standardized APIs and standard components, typically you can take a solution of someone else, you can apply it to your particular problem. Whereas if you're working on-prem, your setup is probably going to be quite exotic compared to maybe other people in the industry, and it almost becomes impossible to find solutions just on Stack Overflow or now from ChatGPT or something, right? It's really difficult to find solutions. So maybe you have a partner, a consultant or service provider who can help you, but that comes at a cost. And that also, you most likely will end up with your question going into a ticketing system and your feedback cycle to solve your problem can go from like minutes of Googling to, okay, now I have to create a ticket with support and I have to wait 2 weeks for them to reply. So I think that really affects your speed of that you can move.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Are there other, let's say, technology accelerators that you're really fond of that you see make teams really productive in data?
Well, I think now it's the hot topic, of course, but using AI in a good way, right? That's, I think, the new frontier.
Have you tried it, like using Cursor or using Copilot or something to accelerate your coding?
I have on more personal projects tried this, and I think there's a lot of value. But working more on clients, what I like to use it for is also just debugging, right? Yeah. So maybe not using a full IDE for it, but really using something like ChatGPT or Gemini just to try and debug specific problems, a bit like a rubber duck.
Yeah.
I see value in that already, and just being comfortable with these tools can also go a long way in helping a junior person.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. I think with that, we covered all the topics, and I just checked again. So the topics were business value to build high performance data teams, first, make sure you have business value. You're building towards business value. Second, it's make sure you have a skilled team. Third was do great stakeholder management. That's the one we were skipping. The stakeholder management for you is just communication, but it's something that we often forget. Fourth was about building the right processes. Agile in the true sense of being agile. Fifth was engineering best practices, like automating tests, automating deployment, stuff like that. And then sixth was technology accelerators like cloud and AI and stuff like that. I think with that, we're coming to a nice conclusion. Before I wrap up, I'd like to ask you one last question. What is for you the biggest thing you've learned in data?
That's a good question.
What is something that you know to be true now that you didn't realize when you started?
I think that it's I've really been challenged in some assumptions that some questions which I didn't think were possible that could be answered with data ends up being possible. And in other cases, but the reverse is true. So there was recently at our company, looking into data about people's skills and interests.
The skills and interest matrix thing.
So like this, there was a use case about using data to, for example, help people find other people who would be interested in or would be able to teach them something. So I think for me, it's the realization that I know now is there's actually a lot more that you can do with data that might not seem obvious initially.
Yeah.
And conversely, some things which maybe seem obvious, once you actually get into the quality of a certain data set, you realize it's impossible.
Yeah. Okay. So the data has surprising ways of being valuable or not being valuable at all.
It will always surprise you. Yes.
Yeah. All right. With that, Rushil, thank you very much for joining the podcast. All the best on your project.
Thank you, Kris.